and gentlemen, good evening. My name is LeShan, and as Executive Director of Parapsychology Foundation, and on behalf of our Board of Trustees and our President, Mrs. Eileen Coley, I welcome you all here this evening. We're particularly pleased to have as our speaker to kick off the Fall Perspective Series, Dr. LeShan. And Dr. LeShan has worked with many of the luminaries of the field, and he managed to hold his own pretty well, I think. He is, of course, noted for his very, very valuable healing work. He is a noted author. I think any serious student of the paranormal have read some of his titles. Alternate Realities come to mind, The Medium, the Mystic, the Physicist. There's some more in the display case in back of you and also on our shelves. He worked very closely with our founder, Eileen Garrett, and I think he always has sought to examine the psychical elements in our lives and really has a sense of the big picture and the implications of those psychical elements for what it really truly means. Let's see, I think at this point I'd like to share with you a little anecdote in that I met Dr. LeShan when I was about 12 years old at the Foundation's offices on 57th Street. And he delighted and surprised me because he had a live gerbil in his vest pocket. I don't know why. He hasn't made that clear to me, I suspect for some scientific protocol. And for many years, up until today, as a matter of fact, whenever I see him, I try and see what's in that pocket. And he has never pleased me with another live gerbil. However, he has never failed to lead me with another insight, a new perspective, and certainly a lot to ponder. And I think tonight, as he discusses his topic at hand, which is the Science of Psychical Research, I think for sure we'll be in for a treat. But before we see what he has up his sleeve, literally and figuratively, I think I'd like to turn this over to the Foundation's president, Mrs. Eileen Coley.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you here and to welcome our dear friend, Dr. LeShan, friend and colleague of many, many years at Parapsychology Foundation. And friend and colleague to my mother, Eileen Garrett. He did many, many research projects with her too. So it is just welcoming a wonderful old friend without the Goebbels, but that's fine.
You told me you were going to give her another one.
All right, well, we'll welcome that too. No, Larry has been with us so long. We published his monograph called A Theory of the Paranormal. He's just been part of the Foundation on and off, and I'm glad we're very much on again tonight. Welcome to Larry.
The work I want to talk about tonight was done in collaboration with a man named Henry Margenau many years ago. He was Sterling Professor of Physics at Yale and was a noted philosopher of science. How to start a science in a new field is something that's been very well known for a long time. There's a well-known procedure worked out. We do certain things, and we have a science of a new area. I'm going to talk about that tonight and how it applies to psychical research. Psychical research has always been interested in a broad spectrum of things. Ehrenwald pointed out years ago that when you talk about the main interest of psychical research, you were talking about people having information they had no right to have, that they couldn't possibly have. And that this fell in itself into a spectrum. On the one hand were what he called the need-determined things. They were things where somebody or something had a need to communicate, and sensory communication was blocked. and a purposeful, meaningful message was given, and the recipient saw it as very important and either went into action or wished they could. That's on the one extreme. The classic example of that is an incident that happened before World War II. A woman living on the East Coast had a son in the Navy in Hawaii. One day while she was preparing supper, she looked up and he came into the room, dripping wet, with a big scar on his, bleeding from his forehead. He said, "Mom, I'm terribly sorry. I never wanted to do this to you." And disappeared. And 3 days later, she got a telegram. He had fallen off the deck of an aircraft carrier, hit his head on a cable, going down on the anchor chain, and drowned. That's the kind of experience that psychical research has been classically interested in. But on the other end of the spectrum is what Ehrenwald called not need-determined, but flaw-determined, error-determined things. It seems to happen not with no particular meaning, as if a bunch of nerve fibers sort of fired off by mistake or were napping at their job. It's like when people guess cards. Guess what's the correct card that's being hidden there. And they don't know whether they got it right or they got it wrong. Eventually, in many experiments, it's shown that they guessed more cards correctly than they could have by chance. There was something going on there. There was some ESP, some telepathy, but it was a different kind. It wasn't regarded as important by the recipient. There seemed no message in it. There didn't seem to be very much meaning in it. These are the flaw-determined. Now, we have a very good science of studying the flaw-determined things. Ryan taught us how to guess cards like mad, and now we use random numbers, and we can guess them and use them. They don't tell us anything very much. And then we know it happens more often when you have kind of minus functions of ego, like REM sleep, or things of this kind. They don't seem to mean very much. But on the other side, on the big need-determined things, we really haven't made a science. There are a lot of reasons for this. One is, it seems very difficult to work with. You can't do them in a laboratory, and parapsychologists as well as other scientists are much happier in laboratories. They feel more secure. It's their own turf. They're in control of things. If something happens they don't like it, they can erase the data. They're very safe there in laboratories. And these don't happen in laboratories. And they don't seem to happen according to any rule. They sort of seem to hop around, as they say. People feel it's hard to do science. And afraid they scare people. They seem to have such big implications, and they do. Ernest Jones was once talking to Freud. Ernest Jones was his biographer. Talking to Freud, and was very shocked that Freud believed in telepathy. And Jones said, "Well, if you believe in thoughts kind of floating around the air, what's to stop you from believing in angels?" And Freud said, "Yes, and even the Liebe Gott, even the loving God." Well, it may not lead us to the loving God, but it sure has tremendous implications, and that does make people unhappy. And in addition, we have a feeling that maybe the flaw-determined, the little card guessing, maybe that can be explained somehow physically. You know, there might be a physical explanation for that. It's so little, so meaningless. It's like atoms running around, molecules bumping into each other. Doesn't seem to mean much beyond that. But the big, meaningful things, like that kid coming into his mother's kitchen, now that's upsetting. And so they're not happy, and gradually we're giving them up. We might describe, for example, the change from psychical research to parapsychology as going in interest in deathbed apparitions to guessing of Zener cards. You can do the Zener cards much more easily, much more safely, but much more uselessly too. They don't seem to mean much. We haven't worked out a science of the big ones. Now there have been attempts to. Really good attempts. Louisa Ryan made a classification system of them. Gaither Pratt made a quantification of mediumistic utterances. Rhea White studied the attitude of teachers and students. Gertrude Schneider studied personality inside. Bill Roll studied psi fields. These were all attempts at a science of the big ones, but they were never followed up. None were presented as a complete system for science. None were ever followed up. And the reasons they weren't followed up would really belong somewhere else than here. We take a different discussion, might make a fascinating evening. why psychical research went down the tube and parapsychology appeared, and gave us mountains and mountains of data to no particular edification of anybody. It might be interesting. What I'd like today is to do two things. First, I'd like to give two examples of what I mean by the need-determined, where somebody or something needs to communicate. Sensory communication is blocked. Communication is made anyway. And the recipient says, this is important. So you have two examples of that. Then I'd like to talk about the general procedure science follows while starting a new science, and then show how it applies to psychical research. The first I'd like to talk about is the incident in 1930. There's a one-eyed pilot named Hinchliffe. He wants to make the first east to west transatlantic flight. He's been trying for some time to get off the ground. He's had trouble with his sponsor. Finally, the sponsor agrees that he can go that night if he'll take a woman co-pilot with him. The sponsor feels this will be much more dramatic, much better PR. He agrees. Takes off. That same night, several hundred miles away on an ocean liner are two old friends of his, Air Force Colonel Henderson and Squadron Leader Rivers Oldmeadow. Spend the usual night on the ocean line, they go to bed. Very early in the morning, Henderson comes into Oldmeadow's cabin in his pajamas and says, my God, Rivers, something ghastly has just happened. Hinch was just in my cabin. High Pachinolo. He kept saying, Hendy, I'm lost, I've got the woman with me and I'm lost. What shall I do? Hendy, I'm lost. And then he just vanished. They talk about it, there's nothing they can do. And that same night, Hinchliffe's plane is lost at sea and he and the woman are drowned. Now here you have a meaningful, goal-oriented, purposeful communication outside the boundaries of sense. This is what I mean by the need-determined. The other one I'd like to tell you about is something that happened in the Parapsychology Foundation. Back, I would say, in around 1970. I don't know the exact date. I could look it up. They were doing the precursor to the Maimonides dream studies. They were getting putzky around with the whole business, and one of the things they were doing was somebody down in Brooklyn who in the middle of the night would start concentrating on a picture chosen at random, and then after they concentrate on it for an hour or two, they call up Eileen, wake her up, and say, what did you dream? This isn't the procedure they used later, obviously, but they were punching around. And one day Eileen came in, and we asked her, I remember somebody else was there with Betha Pantorno, the secretary, and myself. I don't remember who else was there. Were you there, Babs, at that time?
No.
She came in and said, we said, how did the dream go? She said, it was a complete flop. Crimpner said it didn't have anything to do with the picture. We said, what was the dream? She said, well, I dreamed Carrington came into the room. Now, Carrington was a psychical researcher who Eileen had worked with in the 20s and 30s. This was in around 1970. So I dreamed that Carrington came into my bedroom and said, Eileen, you've got to help me. My wife needs you, needs your help. You've got to take care of this. And while you're doing it, there's a box of very important papers under the bed that a wallaby is sleeping on and ruining. And what do you do with a dream like that? And we laughed about it. That was the end of it. The next morning, Eileen came a little bit earlier than she generally came in. And she said, we're in trouble. I know myself, and we're in trouble. I had another dream last night. I dreamed again that Carrington came into the room. He was furious. He said, I asked you to take care of my wife and you haven't, and she needs you. And then he kicked me out of bed. He was so mad. And I woke up on the floor. We've got to do something about this. Well, we looked at each other. What do you do? First thing to do is to find out what you find out about Carrington's wife. Based upon time, I started working the telephone. Called the SPR in London. Nobody knew anything. Called a few people that she knew there. I believe she called Ehrenwald also. Who's one of the old parapsychologists. I don't remember who the others she called, but half a dozen calls were made. Finally, she gave up on parapsychologist and called the man who was high up in the tax bureau, but who had worked with her. She had done 7 seances with her many years before. And then I saw Eileen at her best, cajoling, pleading, almost threatening, kidding, to get this guy to take some action that he was legally forbidden to do, which was to check his tax records and find out what happened. And finally he agreed. An hour later he called back, said where she was. She was living in Devon, in just like an Agatha Christie movie, in a cottage on the moors. And I said, you've got to do one more thing for me. You've got to call one of your bright young people in the tax bureau in Devon and send them down there to see what's happening. And he said, I can't. We went around and around that. Finally he said, well, he agreed. He said, I know somebody down there. I'll go check it out. I know somebody live in Devon. Long and short of it is the man went to the cottage on the moors, found the woman in her 80s, broken hip, lying on the floor. She hadn't eaten anything but an apple in 3 days. She soiled herself. Nobody was due there for a couple of days. She certainly would have been dead. They went down there, called an ambulance. They got her to the hospital. Next day, Eileen called the hospital, called her own medical specialist and people she knew in England, had her transferred to a hospital there. And that was the end of that. Except for the fact that Pontorno, some weeks later, said, you know, I've just been going over the costs of that dream. In English money, it costs us £1,200 for you to have that dream, which is hospital costs and so forth. The only other thing I would add to that was the box with the wallaby on it. We never found anything what the wallaby was about. But there was a box of papers under the bed. They are the most useless papers you can imagine that should have been thrown out 30 years before. Old tax receipts, shopping lists, laundry lists, things like that. Things that an inveterate collector who couldn't throw away anything would put in one place, and it was left there. And again, you had this sense there of somebody or someone, or something, wanting to communicate. You don't know who was the communicator on this. Was it Carrington? Was it his wife? Is the question wrong? Which probably is. But a need to communicate a meaningful message, purposeful, and the recipient recognizes important and takes action where possible. Now, how do you take this kind of thing and make science out of it? We'll have to go a little detour here to see how science does this. Science, this procedure is well worked out. What you do is 3 things. I'll go into in detail. First, you choose a domain, a cross-section of experience you study. And then you say, in that cross-section, I'll give examples in a moment, what observables do I find? What do I see or infer there? And third, what's their relationship? Let's give an example. I take the cross-section of experience of a flat surface, absolutely flat 2-dimensional surface. I'm going to study it with plane geometry, obviously. That's the cross-section I choose. What are the observables I study in that? I find in that lines, distance, or direction, angles, areas, that's all. I don't ask what these things are. I say, what's their relationship? I don't make fancy definitions or metaphysical definitions. I say, what's the relationship of line and angle to area, and so forth. And I find that if I try to define them, I'm not going to be very successful, by the way. Wittgenstein was once asked, what is a mathematical point? Since there's no breadth, dimension, thickness. Wittgenstein said it's obvious. A mathematical point is a place to start an argument. And that's the best you can do. You simply deal with the observables and their relationship. You go to another domain, 3-dimensional space. You go to study the solid geometry. And lo and behold, a new observable appears. Volume. Here's where it came from. It's there. Yes, what's its relation to line, area, and so forth? Observables appear. You simply accept them, and you study their relationship. You leave theory building to very much later. If I'm studying a domain of a few particles, I call it mechanics. And I've got the things I observe, a mass and velocity and acceleration and so forth. If I get a lot of particles, I get a new domain, thermodynamics. And then new observables appear, heat, temperature, things like that. But I don't ask what they are. And I don't ask where they came from. These are the observables in science. When Clerk Maxwell, certainly one of the greatest minds in physics, was asked to define matter and energy, he defined them in this way, which I just happen to have with me. He said, "We are acquainted with matter only as that which may have energy communicated to it from other matter, and which sometimes communicates energy to other matter. Energy, on the other hand, we know only as that which in all natural phenomena is constantly passing from one portion of matter to another." That's the best definition you're going to get of matter and energy. Lord Kelvin wrote in his biography, "I spent my life studying the properties of matter. Never in all his writings did he try to define it. He said, what are its relationships to other people?" Henry Morgan used to love the story of the professor who said to the student, "What is electricity?" And the student thought about it and said, "I forget." And the professor said, "Oh my God, the only man in the world who knew it, he's forgotten." Nobody knows. You don't say, what are things? You say, what do they do? When Newton, who studied the relation of masses to each other, inferred a force called gravity, he was asked, what is gravity? Is that action at a distance, which is impossible? What is gravity? And he said in the famous statement, hypothesis non fingo. I don't make hypotheses. Well, he made lots of hypotheses. What he meant is he didn't make hypotheses about things like that. Like, what are things? He said, what are the relationships of things? Now comes the reason this is important for psycho research almost immediately. And the theory building comes much later, after you've really worked out the relationships and the attributes, the observables in detail. There's one thing I'd like to mention that's an axiom of science, that in any domain, everything, all the observables relate lawfully to each other. There are no wild cards. They all relate very lawfully. Well, how does this relate to psychical research? All right. I said there are three things you do. You choose the domain you're working in, the cross-section of experience. You say, what are the observables, their attributes? And you say, how do they relate to each other? Observables can have attributes. This will be important in a moment. Such as, in physics, you have something called force. This is observable. It has attributes like direction, strength, and so forth. Okay, what domain is it you find in psychical research? Simple. The domain of multiple human beings. Well, there's more than one human being. Sure, you might have psychical research in the world of one human being, clairvoyance or precognition, but that's not really stretching it. In any case, if you have only one human being, you're not going to have any human being at all. Human beings need relationships to the human. Curly, the great primate expert, once said, a solitary chimpanzee is not a chimpanzee, and a solitary human being isn't either. You can be solitary temporarily, as in the Robinson Crusoe situation, but ordinarily we have multiple human beings. That's where we observe psychic events of the kind we're interested in. The big need-determined, purposeful one. Second, that's one observable. Well, that's the domain. In this domain, we see immediately three observables. One, identity. Individuals have identity. Lots of individuals, they each have an identity. They're aware of it. And secondly, they communicate. That's another observable. And third, they have relationships. That's a third. You can find more, but that's enough to go on. So here are three observables. What can we learn from those about psychical research? Remember, the kind of thing we're interested in, again, is the big ones, not the card guessing. The big ones like the Hinchliffe thing, which apparently does actually happen. It's not supposed to. Sir William Crookes was once asked about his belief in one of those incidents. How can he believe it? It's impossible. Crookes said, I never said it was possible. I only said it was true. Yeah. So we've got these three classes of observables. In identity, people have identity, they communicate, they relate. What kind of hypotheses can we make? What kind of testable hypotheses can we make from that? Well, let's start with relationships and psi. One of the major relationships have two particular attributes that are of interest. One is cohesion. I have a relationship with this lady here. How much do I want to keep that relationship? How much do you want to keep that relationship? That's the cohesion in our relationship. We're a group, we're a dyad. We're all a group here. How much do you want to stay a group? I'm a member of this group or that group. What are the forces that make me want to stay in the group? Cohesion is very well known. What have we learned from things like study of small groups, small group behavior, Kurt Levine's group dynamics, his followers, R.F. Bale's interaction process analysis, this kind of thing? We've learned an awful lot. For example, one of the things we've learned in the United States, at least, cohesion is stronger in democratically oriented groups than it is in authoritarianly run groups. This is good evidence, by and large. It's also stronger in groups that are run on a cooperative basis than groups on a competitive basis. Cohesion is strong, more tendency to stay together. So let's reason about this. The stronger the cohesion, the stronger the need to make and continue communication, even when sensory stuff is blocked. Ergo, the more likely you are to get psi. First hypothesis. You'll find more psi in democratically organized groups than you will in authoritarianly organized groups. We're studying it as if these are lines and angles and areas and plane geometry. Secondly, we said cooperative versus competitive. More cooperative the group, more cooperative groups tend to have stronger cohesion, therefore more psi. So we say, if you take the Olympic basketball team, there'll be more cohesion there than there will in the Olympic track and field team, where each person is out for themselves. Ergo, you expect more psi. These are testable hypotheses. We have a tremendous banks of data in our records, starting with the census of hallucinations, God knows how many years ago. We can test these kind of things. They don't need some correction factors, but they can certainly be done. Where else is cohesion stronger? That's a little common sense. The more people like each other, the more stronger the cohesion, the stronger the field of forces to stay in a relationship. Obvious hypothesis. There will be more ESP between people who like each other than people who don't. Again, a testable hypothesis. And if you look what we're doing here, what we're doing is doing it very kind of cold-bloodedly without asking what is ESP? What is the universe like? Is the universe friendly? Does God like us? Are there age? Not any of these things. We're asking, what is the relation of lines and angles and areas and geometry, and what is the relationship of the kind of a group, and how much people like each other to the amount of ESP. Incidentally, that last thing is people like each other more is certainly something borne out by the experiments. Carl Sargent years ago did a study showing that parapsychologists who are warm and open get much better results than parapsychologists who are not. And that Rhea White studies on teachers' attitudes to students and their psi performance bore this out too. That's one attribute, cohesion of the observable relation. Another one is stability. Human beings like stability. We know from all the evidence, all the research, they fight like hell to keep their relationship stable. That's why they invent roles. Roles keep you stable. We act in roles towards each other. Roles can be sociological. He's a father to that boy. psychological. He's a strict father, that boy. But in whatever area, we try to keep him stable. And we know from research that communications tend to be in keeping with the roles. And I say he's a father to that boy, and he probably talks like a father to that boy. The boy whose role is a son to that father talks like a son to that father. Talks in keeping with it. Obviously, then, when communication is blocked, we would say, and you have ESP communication, it would be in keeping with the roles the two have played with each other. That is, whenever I communicate, if you get an ESP kind of communication, need-determined one, it'll be in the same kind of communication, saying the same kind of things that you might have said if you were face-to-face, using a sensory thing. This is common sense. And yet it's how you build a science. You might make some other hypotheses from this, that psychic occurrences are more likely to stabilize relationships than to destabilize them. This also follows. That you'd be more likely to happen when an important relationship is threatened, and the sensory communication is blocked, communication is needed, then you get more psychic communication. These seem so obvious. Okay, let's take another aspect. Let's talk about communication. R.F. Bales once divided all specific verbal communications into 4 classes. Positive responses, attempted answers, questions, and negative responses. You can do this pretty much with any specific comment. Okay. The first 3 say, in effect, I want this relationship to continue. The field of forces is towards continuing it. The last one says, I don't want it to continue anymore. Pushing it away. So you make a hypothesis. The last verbal communication before the ESP transmission would be in the first 3 classes, not the last one. Indicating at that time the field of forces was such that the communication system was going to go on. Let's take one more. We spoke of identity. What do we mean by identity? Erik Erikson wants to find identity as the ability to maintain consistent patterns in the face of change. Identity is the ability to maintain the important patterns of your behavior in the face of change. And we know from the research that people try to strive to maintain their identity as much as their relationships. Okay. The obvious conclusion is that need-determined psi occurrences will tend to aid the person to maintain their identity in the face of change. This is other communications do. The psi occurrences will tend to stabilize identity and maintain important patterns. And again, this is a testable hypothesis. And these are just a few of the kind of things that can be done with this approach. And I'd like to give, these are the example, just a few general comments on it. First, psi occurrences fall into 2 classes in one aspect. Those that accomplish their purpose and those that don't. The Hinchliff one did not. The Carrington one did. When you're doing research design, you have to take this into account. You also have to take into account the kind of data we've spoken about. If you're going to design experiments, understand what kind of groups, what kind of dyads are more likely to transmit information than not. What kind of relationships between experimenter and experimentee, what's the word, subject, you're going to need. We can learn things from that. Second, there's a fascinating implication from this. And that is that from the viewpoint of this research model, you treat 2 different kinds of phenomena the same. One is phenomena where there's a transmission between 2 living people, as ostensibly here between Hinchliff and Henderson. That's one kind of communication. Then there's the communication that's ostensibly from somebody who's dead to somebody who's living. You treat them both the same. They can both be studied in the same way. The implications of this for theory building are tremendous. I'm not quite sure what they are, but they're obviously pretty big and should be looked at. And there are other hypotheses you can make from this. What kind of information is likely to be transmitted? What kinds of stress will relate to what kind of an agent, rules, and so forth. Overall science is a very carefully worked out procedure for studying new areas. Find a new domain, you find the observables in it, choose a domain, find the observables, study their relationships, leave theory building for much later. And there's always a secondary, and always knowing you're not going to really define your subject. You're not going to get ultimate definition as matter, energy, space. I mean, you can say, if you ask a physicist, what is gravity? A physicist will say, gravity is a distortion of the metric of space. Isn't that nice? And then you ask, what is space? And we're off and running. Eventually you get to say, it's twice as long as a piece of string folded in the middle. That's what it amounts to ultimately. You don't get that kind of ultimate definitions. Now I'd like to end with one more incident, one more determined psi occurrence. And this is of particular interest because this is from a ostensibly deceased person to the living. Hinchliffe was from living to living. Carrington, who knows? Whether it's from Carrington, his wife, whatever, you don't know. This one is from an ostensibly deceased person to the living. And it's needy determined, and you have a very, very needy and very, very determined agent. And the incident again happened in the Parapsychology Foundation in the early 70s. There was a man on the West Coast who was a physician and was mayor of a fairly large city and was a philanthropist and sort of a Renaissance man. And after he died, his wife and sister decided to write a biography. And they did. And they kept sending it around to publisher after publisher, and it all came back with the same remark. It's pretty good, but the first couple of chapters are terrible. You got to fix those before we can deal with it. And it's one of those things every writer knows. The more you try to fix it, the worse it gets. They've been around the bend, they were pretty desperate. And they were in New York. Now, the only connection they ever had with parapsychology that I know of is that some years ago, the sister had written to Eileen Garrett about some paranormal experience. She read one of her books. And she happened to find out that Eileen Garrett had a press. I think it was Helix Press at the time. And so maybe they'll publish the book. So they came in, made an appointment, came in, and they wanted to publish the book, and we talked about it. Obviously, it wasn't for Helix Press. Helix Press was on paranormal material. This was straight biography. And they talked about the fact that they couldn't get the first chapter right. I got an idea. I said, look, why don't we do this? Why don't we give these two people a tape recorder? They take it back to the hotel tonight and read into it the first chapter. Then they come in tomorrow with that. And we'll have two tape recorders going. We'll have one tape recorder recording everything that happens, and occasionally we'll turn on the tape recorder with this first chapter. And Eileen will try to go into trance and bring Dr. X in and let him straighten it out. And he'll fix his own biography. Everybody thought this was a marvelous idea. Two sisters went off with it. Came back the next day with the first chapter, and Eileen went into trance. Greetings, Sahib, may your house be free from care. That was Yuvani speaking. And that was the gatekeeper. He always spoke first. And he spoke stage Persian, as near as I could tell. And yes, the usual amenities. What do you say to somebody who says, may your house be free from care? Took me years to find out. I figured out finally, greetings, Yuvani, may your endeavors be fruitful. Committed nobody to anything, but it was very polite and friendly. We had a fine. I miss him. I usually got him his old drinking buddy I lost somewhere along the way. Anyway, he said, what can you do for us? And told him the story, and he said, could we talk to Dr. X? And then when you asked him to speak to somebody else, he always said the same thing that absolutely blew my mind and confused me completely. For a while, at least. He said, wait a moment, I'll see if he's around. And you get to wonder, if he's around, where is he? And if he's not around, where is he? You don't even want to think about that one. And presently she went like this again and came up with a new voice pattern and a new facial expression. And the two women cussed her. It was their brother and husband to a T. And for half an hour was Old Home Week. Talking about incidents, remember this happened, oh my God, I never told anybody about it, you died the next day, she never told anybody. Calling the wife by a name, she's over, that was a pet name, nobody else ever knew it. It was an unbelievable experience. And finally we got down to business, and we turned on the tape recorder with a chapter they had so much trouble with, played a couple of paragraphs, turned it off, and Eileen speaking, or Dr. X, or Dr. X persona, responded, editing it. It was very good editing. And I say this, and also I have to say honestly, that Eileen was a very good editor herself when she was awake, and it was an experienced editor, an experienced writer. It was very good editing. So we went on for another half hour, 40 minutes. At this time I knew something about Eileen. I knew that if she was in trance for an hour, she came out fresh as a daisy, as if she had a wonderful nap. An hour and a half, 2 hours, she came out completely exhausted, dragging her tail. So at the end of an hour, and this is where I speak of him as being a very needy and very determined agent, I said, Dr. X, it's time we have to stop now. We'll continue tomorrow. He said, we're not stopping. I've waited 10 years for this. We're not going to stop. And I said, Dr. X, I'm thinking of the health of the medium, of the instrument. He said, young man, this was 30 years ago. He said, young man, he said, I'm in here and you're out there and I know more about the instrument than you do, and further, I'm a physician and you're not, and I certainly know more and I'm not quitting. And suddenly I realized I'm in an argument with a man who claims to have been dead 10 years, which is confusing. And after a couple of minutes I said, Dr. X, I can't make you get out, there's nothing I can do, but I'm turning off the tape recorders. And unless you're out inside of 5 minutes, I'm erasing everything we've done. This work will never get done. He said, all right, if we continue this session, you promise we'll continue tomorrow. So we continued for another 10 minutes. And they took the tapes, and I began to thinking how I'd been arguing with a man who was dead, feeling I needed a very stiff drink. And Eileen did something quite uncharacteristic at the time. She didn't want to know usually what had happened in the trance session. She didn't mind later reading transcripts. She didn't really want to know. She said this was the reason she'd originally, when working and being trained with Hewitt Mackenzie, she had said that she wanted to do it under hypnosis, be hypnotized, not to remember, so she worked in trance, because it was too spooky to hear herself speak of things she didn't know anything about. So she asked how it went, and I told her a little about it. And what had done, how the two sisters were holding each hand, swearing it was their long loss. And then she said something that, coming from her, made me realize how badly we need much more of the serious basic data before we do theory building. This is a statement that came from the most experienced, honest, knowledgeable person that I've ever known or heard of in the field. A woman who, more than anybody I know, had been there, done that, studied honestly. She'd originally been interested in my being at the foundation working with her because I was an experimental psychologist, and she wanted somebody to make sure she didn't cheat when she was in trance in the experiments. There was no chance of that. She wanted somebody with my training. The most honest person I've known, most deeply knowledgeable in the field. And she said something to indicate that she didn't know what had happened. She looked at me because she saw I was kind of leaning towards the belief that Dr. X had really been around. And she said, always remember, Larry, that awake or in trance, I'm a very good telepath. And the stage lost a great actress in me. She didn't know. And we don't know. But we do know how to work. And how to work in a very basic way to get the kind of data that science needs to build theory. Thank you.
What happened to the biography?
I've often wondered about that. I don't know.
Hell, let's find out.
I have to, I've called him Dr. X for so many years, I have to try to remember look up what his original name was. I don't know. But I remember when I was getting the giggles, one of the things I was worrying about, when you had to be there to see the thing was funny, I was suddenly worried about when it comes out, will it be called a biography or an autobiography? I never could figure out the answer. I don't know what happened to it.
Hans, let's find out. Where is it?
It should be possible to find out. I'll try to dig up the original name.
You bet.
I remember the town he was mayor of. So that we check it out through that. Any comments on this?
Yeah, I'd like to know what you think of organized parapsychology.
Can't hear a word you say.
I'd like to know what you think of organized parapsychology.
What I think of organized parapsychology? I think it would be a great idea.
Well said.
No, I think there is such a thing. I think organized parapsychology is, by and large, an attempt, on the one hand, to be sorcerers and magicians without fighting yourself very much about what you're really doing. And I think one of the great things in this field has been that there's never been any consistent work in a very real sense. And every time we've really gotten something really going, we give it up. For example, the first thing that I know of in the field that really got working consistently was the work on hypnosis at a distance. We had people of the caliber of Binet intelligence tests, LeShan, and others, getting a consistent methodology. They published in a journal called Zoist mostly. Consistent method of how to do hypnosis at a distance. Which is clearly ESP. They were getting systems, and suddenly they stopped. I went to mediums. And finally, about late 20s, we were really learning how to work with mediums. Really learning how to work with psychics. Pratt hadn't made his quantification material yet, he made that a little later, but we learned how. And it was given up in favor of card kissing, which should make you very safe. I think parapsychologists are very much frightened. D.J. West was one of the best of the researchers. And he retired, I think about 4 times, but on one of his four retirement speeches, he said, I've spent all my professional life looking for good results, and none of it following up the few good results I found. And we don't follow up things. One of the things that we were discussing when Martin was speaking here was what to me is the best book that's come out in years in this field, which is Conjuring Up Philip, which gives a very good method in detail of producing good PK. At least it's good PK, maybe other things too. To my knowledge, nobody's ever followed it up. The instructions are there. Then there was a man at Exeter who was doing what was his name? Who was doing very good work in PK.
Bachelor.
Yeah, Buffalo. Nobody's followed up his work. We don't follow up for good work in this field. We're interested in constantly proving ESP. This is the only field that I've ever heard of in science in which have two phenomena. One is that no matter how good a study is, in 10 years it loses all its juice. It doesn't mean much anything anymore. I mean, in science, we don't go back and repeat work. We go advance from it. We We don't go back and do originally Thrasher's work on gangs, Durkheim's work on anatomy, all the early classic studies, studying the fields. We don't repeat them. We don't have to prove the existence of a phenomena. We learn more from them. We don't even repeat the Michelson-Morley experiments. So much modern physics is based. Experiments don't lose their juice. Here they do. Here, no matter how good the report, how good the work. Very exciting. 10 years later, it's lost its juice. You can see this happening today. Hunterton's wonderful work on the Gonsfeld is losing its juice. The random number work is beginning to lose its juice. But the great studies, the Utrecht studies, any one of the great classic studies, the Eva C studies, I think any of us can name 100 of them. Who refers to them anymore? Who looks, for example, at that tremendous body of work called the Cross Correspondences, which will blow your mind apart. When you look, they've lost their juice. It's the only field. And secondly, we spend most of our time in this field trying to prove that ESP exists. Anybody who's in this field at this point, who hasn't made up their mind about it or to get out of the field as a hopeless delayer, procrastinator, they're never going to make up their mind. We go, why don't I try to make up, prove it exists? We've proved it exists.
But why is the delay? Why do you think there is, this sort of like moving away toward from promising areas? Why does that keep happening?
I think it's a pretty frightening field. I think one of the things it does is questions all your metaphysical assumptions about what the world is like, what reality is like. And I've learned to regard human beings, and I deal with them as something bounded within their own skin, so to speak. And sure, I can look at their writings or hear their voice on telephone, or if I really was feeling sick, on email or something like that. But they're a person. And suddenly the boundaries begin to break down by pictures of the world. It's a very frightening field. Kurt Goldstein, the psychiatrist, one of the great psychiatrists of our time, is coining the term catastrophic anxiety. And he says that your ego is built on a picture of the world is built on the ego. And they support each other and reinforce each other. You take away the picture of the world, a tremendous amount of anxiety rises. Ego collapse. Feels threatened. I think that's part of it. Beyond that, I don't know the answer.
Well, that sort of contradicts some of your earlier suggestions, because here you have a dissolution of the ego, a dissolution of identity. Psi is threatening that, and whereas earlier you had suggested that Psi would support it. I think your second part is correct. I think this phenomena does challenge the issue of identity, ego, and individuality. But that certainly undercuts some of your earlier suggestions.
You're probably right. I think that facing the implications of Psi, which most of us don't do, even when we have the incidents, even when you have a tremendous Psi incident, we see it as the immediate thing that's happened here. We don't face the implications. When we're forced to face them, we think of some kind of a physicalist. Physical. It's been shown a long time ago you can't possibly have a physical explanation of Psi. We don't face that. It's only when you're working in this field, you're getting consistent results when, so to speak, the paranormal is constantly walking around the room. It's like being in the same institute with Eileen Garrett. The paranormal kept walking in the door. Eventually you have to face it. It's pretty anxiety-producing. I state that myself. I remember after I got into this field, a terrifying dream. I dreamt that I was a kind of a gorilla that lived in the ocean and I was drowning. And when I looked at this dream, gorillas are very, very strong. But in order to use your strength, you have to have something to hold on to. Strength means nothing. You've got nothing to hold on to. And here I was losing what I had to hold on to as an experimental psychologist and as a person, my view of the world. So my feeling is if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. Yeah.
I think without factoring in the existence of the so-called other side of life, whatever you want to call it, none of the explanations are possible. Because nearly all of them are not explanations of the ability of a psychic, the ability of a researcher to work with a psychic, but the ability of receiving what is given by living living beings in another state of being. Without that, you get nothing. That is my personal opinion. You must factor it in. Then you get all the explanation you want.
You may well be right, but you're doing exactly what I was saying we should not be doing now, your theory building. And I think we need much more data before we do theory building. The very basic data of what conditions psi is transmitted under, when it's transmitted, what kind of information is transmitted. I think we need that first before we theory build. And hey, it's more fun to theory build. I much prefer it myself, and I even suspect you're right personally. But I don't think it's time for that in science.
I suspect that the reason that we keep reinventing the wheel and there's this antagonism to if a phenomena exists or not, it's not. I don't believe that it is a fear of psi. There's lots of disciplines that are very a fear of psi, a fear of the phenomena. There's lots of disciplines that are very healthy. That are also very like quantum physics, or even plain old atomic physics. With there's lots of disciplines, genetics, all sorts of disciplines that shape the idea of identity that are doing very well and are producing results. It seems what's different about parapsychology or psychical research is that it doesn't have any of the structure, in a sense, to promote growth in the field. For example, textbooks or teachers or foundations that are really bringing in young people and educating them to the classic texts you were talking about. It's all kind of piecemeal. If you want to know about Philip or the Rhine studies or any of the cross-correspondence you were talking about, you have to go all over. And many libraries don't have it, and I think this is the main reason we keep finding ourselves every 10, 20 years back in the same boat and these things lose juice.
You may be right, and I'm sure that that's a factor, but I would point out also that there have been periods where there was a great deal of interest in psi through the general culture. And these period things eventually also died out. You had, for example, in Germany in the 20s, a tremendous amount of interest in it. In the 60s here, you had a tremendous amount of interest. And there were books all over the bestseller list of Shirley MacLaine and those two women who went to Russia and lied all over the place as to what they found. What were their names?
Schroeder and Ostra.
What?
Schroeder and Ostra.
Yeah. That was very, very popular.
They didn't capitalize on it. I mean, you had periods where psychology was very popular also in the 20s and things like that, and then it kind of dropped out, but they capitalized on the moment. Created institutions, lasting places, textbooks, very simple things like that just don't exist in this discipline, and I think it's unlikely that new people coming into the discipline are not going to find themselves reinventing the wheel.
You may be right.
Just to follow up on
A little louder.
Elliot's comment, I think what happens to this tremendous interest is that it gets transformed into something that is not science. For instance, all the interest in the 1960s in psi, Carlos Castaneda came along with his Don Juan teachings, and now we have this whole interest in shamanism, and it's become a personal quest rather than engaging in science as a discipline, as a group activity. And we can see it also in what happened at JFK University in California. JFK University. They had a program in parapsychology for the master's degree. That has been dropped, and now they have a program in transpersonal psychology and consciousness. And we can see growing in psychology and philosophy this movement about consciousness. It's coming back finally. Behaviorism is down, consciousness is up. And this is the doorway that psi is coming through now in the academic community. So things change. And we just have to keep up, that's all.
Well, I would like to suggest that most of the trends you've identified I would agree with, but you have continued to claim that we must simply collect data before we theory build. Well, you have come from the discipline of psychology. You have a whole lot of theories that you have not examined that underlie how you look at that data. You are not seeing all this other stuff as the direct observables. That's what you should be theorizing about, and your psychology can't handle that because you have an entity type of approach. If you theorize from a sociological standpoint, you come up with drastically different conclusions.
Do it. Come up with a scientific program from a sociological viewpoint, and so maybe you get somebody to follow it. To do it consistently. I hope you will. As you say, I'm a psychologist.
I think you are confusing the telephone with the speaker, basically. That, I think, is the basic problem with it. If we cannot accept that all this is happening because of entities that are the speakers using everything else only as a telephone, and that none of the telephones originate anything, I mean anything, then we will never get a scientific explanation, because there isn't any.
Fascinating metaphor. But I still think your theory, Billy, before I'd be ready to. I'm not saying we need more data. I'm saying we need a kind of consistent approach to the large, interesting kinds of things. I think one of the things about the flaw-determined things, the card guessing and so forth, is when last analysis gets awfully dull. And it reminds me of something that William James once said about experimental psychology. He said it could only have originated in Germany because it could only have originated in a country whose inhabitants were incapable of being bored. And I think it's what I find with the Zener cards too. I think what we do need is some kind of consistent program with this.
I'm curious, just in terms of on a personal level, you got into this stuff a really long time ago, before it was really popularized as it is now with all these movies. And what kind of effect did that have on your, meaning in your life, and, your worldview?
Certainly taught me to really believe and understand that at least half the things I believed in most firmly weren't true, but I wasn't sure which half they were. And to really believe that, and to understand. Well, I once was giving a talk on I forget where it was. Somebody asked me to talk on what it felt like to be a parapsychologist. And I usually prepare before I talk pretty carefully. But this time I didn't have a chance to, so I was curious to what I was going to say, so I listened. And I heard myself say, in the middle of the talk, since I've become a parapsychologist, I've gained a great deal of weight. And that's because I've had to eat so many of my own words. And it's true. Most of the things I believed in, I found weren't true. And that had to look with a completely different set of eyes. And I wasn't quite sure what they were. I came into the field through the back door. I came into the field with a grant to find out about a strange disease which had never been classified. See, one way to get famous in psychology or psychiatry is to have a disease named after you. I won't mention Hansen's disease here, but that's the way to get famous. And it seemed to me that there was a disease I recognized nobody had ever examined. There were these very good people who did very good, tough work. William James, Gardner Murphy, LeShan, a lot of others. And they believed in the paranormal, which meant there was sort of a hole in their ego where they had a big soft spot somewhere there. Sort of like the old concept of paranoia where you're perfectly sane in every area, but you're a complete fruitcake in one. I mean, perfectly sane except you believe that the box manufacturers of Cleveland, Ohio are trying to murder you. Just something like that. Okay, otherwise. So I believe there was this kind of disease that James, Gardner Murphy, and others had. And I didn't know whether it was a schizophrenia or a hysteria, but I was going to analyze and find out what it was and get it named after me and be famous. And that's when I got the first grant on. And then I started to go to the basic libraries. And after 3 months, I sat up suddenly, the first place you look is what kind of nonsense sucked them into believing these old wives' tales. And I'm an experimental psychologist. My training is in experimental design, scientific method. And the goddamn stuff was tighter than a drum. I could either believe that there was real paranormal activity going on in this world, but the biggest conspiracy in history, involving a tremendous number of people, a tremendous amount of time and trust in the laboratories, it all joined up. It was almost nonsense. It wasn't that paranoid. And then I realized this was the most important thing. If it were true, the most important thing I'd ever run into. At that point, I decided I had to find out more about it.
I might interrupt her and say that I read your books in that way. Years back, thinking, this guy sounds really sane, but he's got a soft spot.
Tradition goes on. But at that point, I come across in readings 42nd Street, Eileen Garrett's name. And I came across mention of the Parapsychology Foundation. I realized I've got to talk to somebody who's really been there. I wanted to see her. And Mark Ebon vetted me and checked me out very carefully and said, I think he's all right. They had a very bad experience with a psychologist coming in just before me. Remember Ed Gurdon?
Oh, yeah.
There was a man named Ed Gurdon who came into this foundation and said he really wanted to study objectively this. And he wrote the most biased and critical article I've ever seen on it.
We published it, too.
We published it, too. And so they were pretty cautious about psychologists. But after Ebon vetted me and Eileen looked at my aura, they decided it was all right.
Don't you think there's a reason for people to be scared to deal in this field? Because you have the problem, and we all get these phone calls of people who say that not just that the CIA is reading their mind, but that there is a borderline between what is the reality of psychic experiences and a mental phenomenon which is irrational. So we have to be careful, in fact, in letting people believe too much. And we have a responsibility, what shall I say, not to encourage dogmatic beliefs, because they're risky like all kinds of fundamentalists. And there can be fundamentalism in this field. It can be just as personally risky as any other fundamentalist.
I can't agree with you more. I think the greatest enemy of the progress in this field is not the lack of books and so forth, but the people who believe too much, believe everything, and who are very dogmatic about it. I remember Julie Eisenberger addressing a group like this once, with a typical Juliism, as they used to call it, saying, you have to remember that just because a fact is rejected by modern science does not mean that it is valid. And you get this kind of people. One woman in California said to me once, my philosophy is, I believe everything till it's disproven. And there goes 300 years of science down the tubes. You find these kind of people who believe everything. They're just as bad. We know some things. We do know that sometimes people have information they couldn't possibly have through the senses, or through manipulating information they got through the senses. We're pretty sure about that. We're not pretty sure, we're certain of that at this point. I think what?
Maybe it's sort of the ultimate fear of intimacy, because the implication is that if you're connected in a way that is so overwhelming.
You hear that back there? No. And I think that's a very important, very possibly too. It's a communion, and you always fear of that. Curiously enough, I think we know two limitations of psi. And in all the years I've only been able to find two, and I'd be curious if anybody came up with a third or fourth. I'd love to. One is, it seems to me that a psi pickup cannot differentiate between what's conscious and what's unconscious material. Just as if a piano is playing in the next room, I can tell you a lot about the pianist and a lot about the piano, but I can't tell you the color of the piano. And I don't think psi can differentiate that. And the second thing is it seems to me from all the evidence that you cannot have a psi pickup of information that the agent wants to keep hidden. That if I want to keep something really private, I don't think it can be picked up paranormally. I'm not sure of the second, because the evidence certainly looks like that. Does anybody know of any other limitations on psi?
Well, on the second, you got the government psychic spying program, and certainly there was a strong desire for enemies to keep that secret, and I think there was some success.
I'd like to see the data. I haven't seen data on that. I just don't know. I don't see any data on the government spy program that would indicate any successes.
There's quite a bit published now.
Might be the answer to that one. As they say, back to the old drawing board. Other comments? Thank you.
Didn't I tell you you'd have some interesting insights in that pocket despite the gerbils? For sure. Thank you very much, Dr. LeShan.
Hi there, I'm Lisette Coley. I'm president of Parapsychology Foundation, so welcome to our YouTube channel. We have lots to look at, so please check out our videos. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.